Welcome back to another episode of the True Crime Show. Now, on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, David Beers. Now, David holds a Bachelor of Professional Studies degree from Empire State College, and he previously served 6 years in the United States Marine Corps before being honorably discharged at the rank of Staff Sergeant. Now, Beers became a sworn member of the New York State Police as a trooper and transitioned into the private sector, where he became a licensed private investigator. Now, his first book, Reign of Injustice, tells the disappearance of Michele Harris, who on September the 12th, 2001, went missing from a small town in upstate New York. Now, she's never been found, and the mystery surrounding her disappearance remains. Now, 4 years after she went missing, her wealthy husband, Carl Harris, was arrested and charged with her murder. David Beers, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. It really is. So, obviously, we're talking about your first book. This is your first book, yeah?
Yeah, my very first book. Yeah, I never dreamed I'd be a published author, but this was a story that needed to be told.
I know, right? How long did it take you to write this book?
Almost 3 years.
And you've been working on the case since?
No, the case is pretty much closed as far as I'm concerned. But it started back in 2001, and it really didn't come to an end for Cal Harris, the subject of the book, until May of 2016. And by January of 17, I decided to start writing the book, and then I finally got it published very end of November of 19.
So you were there. Yeah, almost 3. So you were there for all of his trials?
Correct. Yeah, I was involved right from the beginning. Within even well before he was arrested, I was hired by him and his dad to help find his wife. So I got involved within about a week of her disappearance.
Incredible. Okay. Wow. All right. So the book's called Reign of Injustice. Why did you call it that?
Well, that's kind of what it was. I had a lot of different titles I was tossing around, but when I was writing the final chapter, I realized how much of an injustice this was that reigned over 15 years. So my editor really liked the name of my last chapter, which was Reign of Injustice, and she said that should be the title of your book. Mm-hmm. She said it ties in nicely, so. That's what it became.
That's great. That's great. I love it. Okay, and of course, let's talk about you just for a little bit here as well. So you're still an active private investigator?
Yes, I'm still doing it. I got my PI license in April of '96, so I've been actively doing that ever since.
Now, you've got an interesting past, which you've talked about on other podcasts, and you maybe mention it in the book a little bit.
Yeah.
So, a trooper, New York State?
Yeah, I was a trooper and then later an investigator with the New York State Police.
And how many years did you have that job for?
About 17.
Right. Okay. So what happened to I mean, obviously you went, you sort of, climbed up the ladder, but,
Yeah.
there's a whole story as to why you became an investigator. If you could just tell us that interesting story.
Yeah. It's a very long story, but kind of in a nutshell, my career kind of came to an abrupt halt when a couple of my colleagues had got caught up in evidence tampering and perjury, and because I had worked with both of them, my name came up, and as a result, accusations were made against me. But in the end, even though I was charged with tampering with evidence and perjury, I went to trial, well, not once but twice, and I was completely exonerated of everything. But the damage was done, so I lost my job, but not my training and experience. So the logical transition for me was to put my skills to work in the private sector.
Absolutely. Now, go ahead.
So that's what I do now, and what happened to me is kind of the driving force about why I do what I do, and because there's a need to do that.
because there is injustice sometimes in some cases.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not always so clear cut. I mean, we live in difficult times right now, don't we? While we're taping this, there's the Minneapolis riots going on.
Yeah.
And, a cop's just been obviously charged with third-degree murder and everything else. And it's a different time for police right now. Would you, I mean, if you could go back or to be a cop now, is that something you would ever want to do? I mean, if you was in the state to do it, do you know what I mean? Mentally to go back. But I mean, is that a tough career nowadays, do you think?
It is a tough career, and I don't know that I'd want to go back. I loved it while I was doing it, and I never dreamed that anything would happen to me that would prevent me from finishing my career as a police officer. But when it did, it didn't take me long to realize that there is a life after the state police, and there was a need for what I do in the private sector. So, and so my eyes were kind of opened because I was kind of blind to some of these things as a police officer, some of these injustices that were going on. And so now I do my little part to try to ensure that justice is done, whatever that happens to mean.
Absolutely. I mean, the training that you took from that, the years being a police officer must have been immense, and to apply that to what you're doing now. But as you say, I mean, I'll personify your words here a little bit. You don't look back. Do you know what I mean? What you've done was the right choice. I'm sure it was hard at the time to transition, but I bet it was. But you've done some amazing work. So okay, let's get into the story then. So this is set a day after the terrorist attacks in New York in September 12th, 2001. So just tell us about what happened.
Yeah. On that day, September 12th, 2001, Michele Harris was reported missing. She'd gone to work the night before, the afternoon before, and she worked until about 9 o'clock. On the night of September 11th, and then she left work around 9:15. She after work she had a drink with a coworker, and then she left. And she had a boyfriend at the time, so she went to his house, stayed with him till about 11:15, and then she left there. And presumably she was on her way home, which was another 20-minute drive up into a remote area in the town of Spencer, New York, where she lived in a beautiful lake house, $500,000 lake house that her husband built for her. But her and her husband were going through a divorce, and there were accusations of domestic violence. And he was a wealthy car dealer and had a lot to lose. So he obviously became a suspect when she disappeared. And on top of that, he had some rather poor personality and character issues that made it so a lot of people didn't like him, and that didn't help the matter. But anyway, within an hour after she was reported missing, the state police launched an investigation right away because of the suspicious circumstances. And they went in and talked to Cal Harris, the husband, and interviewed him. He cooperated with them, took him out to his house, let him look around inside and out as needed. And later they launched a massive search of his property, which encompassed over 250 acres. And they used forest rangers and divers and helicopters and cadaver dogs, everything you can think of, to try to find Michele, believing that she might be on the property. And they never found her. And they never found a murder weapon. So it was a long time that they spent searching for her repeatedly at his house and the surrounding property, and they never found a thing, not a shred of evidence on the property. Inside the house, however, they did find some specks of blood in the garage and in the little entryway into the kitchen from the garage. And they kind of jumped the gun a little bit there and kind of presumed that that was the remnants of a homicide that occurred at the house. but they were never able to establish any volume of blood other than those few specks. And more importantly, they weren't able to establish how long those specks had been there, whether it had been days, weeks, or even months. So the evidence in the case was weak at best. But despite that, 4 years went by and nothing happened. They didn't find Michele, and no arrests had been made. But finally, they decided, for whatever reason, even though they had never found anything more, they decided to go ahead and arrest Cal, which they did. And then later, he was tried in this little small town and convicted. But the interesting part about the story was that shortly after he was convicted, a new witness came forward with some substantial new evidence, and that kind of changed the course of the case for the next several years.
Yeah. So okay. So Michele Harris, obviously, she's the victim here. I'm guessing that her family are still alive.
Oh yeah, her and Cal had 4 children at the time. The oldest one was 7 at the time, and the youngest one was only a year and a half. And they're all adults now and doing well. And Michele had a brother and sister-in-law and her father. They're still alive. The Taylor family. But they really despised Cal and had strong beliefs that he was responsible for her death. And as a result, they were less than cooperative when it came to myself trying to help find her.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That was kind of my point, really. How cooperative were they in that search? Yeah. I mean, I guess they obviously they played a part to want to see some justice for their daughter's disappearance and obviously murder. Yeah. Yeah. Now, obviously, they were going through a divorce. Carl and Michele were, and as you've mentioned, there was accusations of domestic violence, or hearsay, whatever it was. And I believe they were sharing separate beds. He was living upstairs and she was sleeping downstairs. But she did have another boyfriend at the time, and he was the last one to have seen her at 11:15 around that time at night when she left him.
That's correct. And so obviously he was a significant other, and he was the last one to see her alive. So at the time he was considered a suspect as well. But the police were confident that he wasn't involved, and they just believed everything he said. But unfortunately, they really didn't eliminate him properly. They never investigated his home, forensically for any evidence, his home or his car or his person. He even had some hunting property just over the border in Pennsylvania where he had taken Michele. And they never searched any of those places. So they kind of abbreviated their elimination process regarding him, as well as some of Michele's other boyfriends that she had. While she was seeing this one boyfriend, she was having intimate relations with another coworker, and there were others besides that. So she was leading a very vulnerable lifestyle, and whether she realized it or not, she was putting herself at risk.
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, she was because she was a beautiful woman, pretty blonde hair, brown eyes, petite, and on top of that, she was very fun-loving, flirtatious, but also promiscuous, and as a result, she got caught up in a situation where she had made herself vulnerable to someone or more than one who looked at her as a possible target.
Right, absolutely, and the property size of the home that they were both living at the time, both Carl and Michele, it was acres, wasn't it? It was a large property.
Yeah, about 252 acres, most of which was densely wooded. There was a big lake there and some open fields where there was, like the right of way for a power line and a gas line. And that was where Cal would ride his ATVs and his snowmobiles. So those are the areas where they really focused on their search for Michele, was along those areas. But they used the forest rangers to pretty much check every square inch of that property. And the rangers were convinced that there was a 95% chance that she was not on the property.
Now, the boyfriend that she stayed with on the night of her disappearance, he, I believe, had a polygraph test?
Yes.
How accurate are they, do you think, with your experience?
In my opinion, not very accurate, and probably even less so if they're conducted by an investigator who's working the investigation. So I don't have a lot of faith in the polygraph itself. Most people refer to it as a lie detector, but in my opinion, it's more of a fear detector. And so I to rely on the polygraph exclusively is no means of a positive way of eliminating someone.
No, absolutely. And I believe Carl's lawyer at the time told him not to go ahead with a polygraph test.
Correct. Even though he wanted to, but his attorney advised, that it probably wasn't in his best interest, especially if it was going to be conducted by those who already believed he was guilty.
Absolutely. So, okay, so he wakes up in the morning of the 12th, and
Yep.
Where was Michele's van?
He didn't know it at the time, but when she didn't show up that morning to help get the kids ready for school, Cal's a very organized person, and he wanted to stay on schedule to get his kids to school and himself to work. So he called their adult babysitter. Her name was Barb Thayer. And she agreed to come over because, he said Michele wasn't there. So she came over. It was only about a 4 or 5 minute drive for her. But when she arrives at the end of the driveway, she sees Michele's van parked there. Now, their driveway is like a 1/4 mile long. So you can't even see their house from the end of the driveway. So she gets out and looks through Michele's van, thinking that maybe she's sleeping it off in the back because she knew she had trouble drinking in the past, or maybe she had wandered away. But the van was open, the keys were in the ignition, but she was nowhere to be found. So she drives on into the house and tells Cal. Then the two of them, start speculating as to what happened with Michele. And then they decide to go out and get her van and drive it back into the house. So that's what they do. And then Cal, gets the kids and takes them to school, and he goes to work, thinking that, she's still out with her boyfriend drinking or something, and she'll show up. And he was more annoyed than anything that she wasn't there taking care of the kids and that meant he had to do it.
Okay. What type of mum was she? Was there any sort of character references that she was, a good mum, and that that she, because obviously it sounds like that she was starting a new relationship without, even though she was in the same house with the ex-husband, in a sense. Do you know what I mean? That's not easy. That's very. I mean, and how did Cal feel about that? Did he just? I mean, what was his reaction to what was going on at the time?
Yeah, Michele was a great mother, according to just about everybody I talked to, even Cal. He said, he didn't have a problem with that at all. She did all kinds of things for the kids, activity-wise. And he said, because the two of them were going through a divorce, they weren't talking to each other pretty much at all. But when it came to the kids' activities, that was the only thing they would talk about, because they both loved their kids and wanted the best for them. But there were those who kind of condemned Cal for the way he reacted about Michele being missing, that he didn't care and wasn't concerned, and he was more concerned about himself and the kids. But Cal would say, that's not true. He says, I was concerned about her. I was concerned about the kids. He says, because now I have to see to their needs because their mother's not here. And he did. He took good care of the kids. And one of his biggest concerns was what what impact the investigation and Michelle's disappearance would have on them. So in that regard, he was trying to shield them from that.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's just so, I mean, how many cases have you come across where a person just disappears like that?
It's rare. In my career, I can't think of any case I worked on that involved murder without a body.
Yeah. Right. Right. Now, there was some eyewitnesses to that truck, Michelle's truck, being parked outside, potentially. I believe someone drove past from looking at the book. Just tell us about that, some of the eyewitnesses that saw some sort of argument taking place. And I don't know if I've got that right, whether the truck was outside the front of the house at the time, down the driveway, or whether that was parked somewhere else. So just fill that in for us.
Yeah, well, this information came out a little later. Actually, after Cal was convicted, this new witness came forward and said that he had been driving by the Harris driveway early that morning, around 6 o'clock. And as he was going by, he was hauling a big hay wagon with his truck, and it was a dirt road, so it was pretty narrow. And there was this dark truck angled out into the road, partially blocking the road. So he had to just barely creep by in order to get his hay wagon by. But as he was doing that, he looks over and he sees this young man, dark hair, tan, in his 20s, and a woman, blonde hair, who looked like Michele Harris, and she appeared to be crying or having been crying. But he made eye contact with this man, got a good look at him. But if it was Michelle, which we believe it was, she didn't make any signal that she was in any kind of distress, so he just continued on his way. And then later, that same morning, another man drove by with a companion, and he saw basically the same thing. Only when he was driving by, he had his passenger had her window down because she was smoking, and he saw the same man. That he described the same situation, the same description, but he heard the man say something to the effect, "Just get in the car, get in the damn car." But again, the woman, we believe was Michele Harris, didn't make any motion that she was in trouble, so he too, continued on his way.
So, were they ever questioned by the police, and did they ever identify that was the identity of the person she was speaking to close to the boyfriend that she stayed with that night, or one of the colleagues, or a colleague from work that she was seeing?
Actually, the police didn't interview these people right away. I did, because they had approached the defense first after Cal was convicted. But initially, the police had learned. I'm trying to think how this happened. I'm trying to get ahead of myself here, but they had interviewed some neighbors that remembered seeing her van there that morning, but they really couldn't offer anything more than having seen it there. But when these people came forward, like I said, they came to the defense first. So initially, until we could try to corroborate what they had seen, we weren't sharing that with the police yet. But later, we did do that, and they had not. The police had never interviewed them before because they weren't aware of who they were. So they didn't have knowledge of this information at the time.
But when you interviewed them, did you put pictures in front of them and say, well, look, does this guy, is this the profile of the guy that you may have seen having the disagreement with Michelle?
Not right away. Initially, I thought the description matched the boyfriend that Michelle was seeing. I thought for sure it would probably be him. But what didn't match was the vehicle. And that was where I focused my attention, was trying to find out who, if any of these early suspects, drove a dark-colored pickup truck. And I couldn't find any. I was looking at the boyfriend. She had two or three. So I was looking at all of them and their associates and family to see if they owned or had access to a dark pickup truck, and I couldn't find anybody. So I was kind of at a loss at that time. And it wasn't until later that we learned from another witness about who that may have been. And from there, we were able to identify a man by the name of Stacy Stewart, who he was kind of a transient steel worker who would come up to New York from Texas. And he worked at a steel plant nearby, and would he was a frequent customer of a bar, restaurant called Lefty's in Waverly, New York, where Michele worked. And he had befriended her there, and was often seen, sitting at the bar talking with her, or he would come in after work and ask to be assigned to one of her tables, and if she wasn't available, he'd wait. From there, I just kind of launched my investigation into him, and I was eventually able to get a photograph of him from Texas, along with one of his associates. And then, so now we had something to work with, and eventually I did show it to the man that first identified this man at the end of the driveway, and he said that he was very certain that was him.
Okay, and is that man that identified him still alive, or?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What background did you find on Stacy Stewart then?
A lot of things. He didn't have any real criminal background to speak of other than a DWI, and his license was suspended, but that's not a big deal. But one of the things I found out was, and this had been reported early to the police, that he had been interviewed by the police early in their investigation and had been eliminated, supposedly. But after his first interview by the police, the secretary at the steel plant called the police back and said, Stacy Stewart is here and he's acting real nervous and asking a lot of questions. Later, she added that he had called in sick around the time Michele went missing, a couple of times. She couldn't remember the exact dates, but was sure it was around that time. So they went back to interview him again, and he just denied having seen Michele for at least a couple of weeks. But during that interview, he told them that after work on 9/11, he went home, called his mother in Texas, and then stayed home until he went to work the next morning between 4 and 5 a.m. Well, the 4 or 5 a.m. time frame at that time didn't mean much, because the police were under the impression that Michele had been killed around midnight when she arrived home from her boyfriend's house. But later, after the new witness came forward, and he's placing Michele Harris at the end of the driveway around 6 a.m. and still alive, and in the accompaniment of another man, not her husband, then all of a sudden that time frame becomes a little more significant. So we started looking into that and found out that Stacy Stewart worked at this steel plant, and they were working some long hours, but it was from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And everybody we talked to that worked with him, including his supervisor and the safety director and other coworkers, said nobody would ever come in at 4 or 5 a.m. because there would be nothing to do. It was line work, and the line couldn't function until everybody was there. He said there'd be nothing to do. So that kind of jumped out at me. Then I started taking a closer look at the property he had purchased after he had been working at the steel plant for about 4 months. Initially, the company put him up at a local hotel, paid their expenses, but then encouraged them to try to find their own place, which he did. And he bought a little small log cabin up in the woods a few miles from work on about 4 acres of property, with a pond out front and a big wide open space out back for riding ATVs or what have you. But when I checked the real property records, I found out that he had purchased the property about 3 weeks before Michele disappeared, and he signed a mortgage agreement with Citibank, and for a very reasonably affordable mortgage, and the first payment was due on September 15th. He never made the first payment. In fact, he never made any payments, and later just abandoned the property and moved back to Texas. So that was kind of a red flag for me, which really perked my interest in learning more about him. And then I learned that he had a coworker who had also been recruited by the company to come up from Texas, and they had come up together, and they were good friends and pretty much did everything together. They worked different lines at work, but they socialized together after work. And his name was Chris Thomason. So I ended up getting photographs of both of them. And then when I was talking to witnesses and coworkers and so forth, I was able to confirm that's who they were. And I just kept learning more and more and more about Stacy Stewart that was really pointing to him as a potential suspect. And he fit the description that was provided by the witness, as well as because when the police first interviewed him in 2001, they had run a criminal history and motor vehicle check on him, which was attached to the lead. And when I revisited that lead, I saw that he owned a 2000 black Chevy pickup truck, which matched the description provided by the witness. So that really set up another red flag. So I worked on this for about 4 months before we decided to tell the police about it, because we wanted to kind of make sure that we investigated it properly and it wasn't just something that somebody made up. So we investigated not only what the witness had seen, but we investigated him as well. And then there finally came a time when I took the risk of sharing what I learned with the police, hoping that they would take the lead and pursue it properly. But my fear was it would fall on deaf ears because they had already convicted Cal, and as it turns out, that's what happened. They pretended to be interested, but really weren't. And so a lot of the evidence just kind of fell to the wayside and was never investigated properly.
So when this part of your investigation was taking place, was Cal already serving time for the murder?
Yeah, he had been convicted, and he was still in the local jail waiting to be sentenced.
Oh, right. Okay.
But he had not been sentenced yet. In fact, by the time we developed our new information from the new witness and put it together in a motion, it was presented the day that Cal was supposed to be sentenced for the murder. But the motion was addressed the new evidence and was asking the court to dismiss the case against Cal because of the new evidence, with the argument that had the jury heard this information, it would have been a different result. And later there was a hearing, and the judge heard from the new witness and found him entirely credible and threw out the conviction.
And this was the witness that saw Michele with this potential Stacy Stewart potentially.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And so it was trucked. Okay, and then he was released.
So yeah, he was released. He was back. His bail was still in effect. So he got out of prison and then ended up going back to trial in the same little town. But in the meantime, the police launched a very aggressive investigation against the new witness because they, trying to destroy his credibility. And they did a pretty good job of it. So by the time he testified at the second trial, they made him so angry that he kind of lost it during the trial. And as a result, apparently the jury didn't want to believe him. And they ended up finding Cal guilty again.
Okay, so this was the second trial we're talking about now when they found him guilty again. And then how long did he serve in state prison?
Yeah, so after the second trial, he was sentenced to 25 years to life. And he ended up in Auburn State Prison in upstate New York. And he was there about 3.5 years while his appeal was pending. Initially, the lower court appellate division upheld his conviction, with the exception of one judge. In that judge's dissenting decision, Cal's attorneys were able to argue that, with that judge's permission, they were asking the upper appellate division to hear the case. And as it turns out, they agreed to hear the case. And to make a long story short, they unanimously agreed that Cal should get another trial, and that it should be held in a different venue.
So just so that my brain's working here, this would be the fourth trial then?
The third one coming up.
Third one coming up. Okay, so let's just pause it at the third one coming up. So with Stacy Stewart, did anyone ever get to interview him, or?
Yeah, I interviewed him.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I went to Texas. I went down there twice.
And did you ever meet Chris Thomas as well?
Chris Thomason, yes.
Yes, you did, Chris Thomason. So when you interviewed these two people, what was your take on them as a cop?
They were lying. Yeah, they couldn't keep their story straight. We interviewed Chris Thomason first, and he was cooperative, answered our questions, but we could tell he wasn't being truthful based on what we'd already learned. He didn't know what we knew, but we knew he was holding back. He knew something more. And the first time we went to Texas, we couldn't find Stacy, so we had to kind of come home empty-handed, other than Chris Thomason and a couple other witnesses. So it wasn't totally unproductive, but we couldn't find Stacy. But then about 1.5 years later, we went back, and we found him, and then we were able to talk to him. And that interview did not go well. He did talk to us, but we could tell by the look in his eye that he didn't want us there. And just like Chris, he was just making stuff up as he went along, and so we knew he was lying. And what was interesting is that they were both pointing the finger at each other. That like Stacy was claiming that Chris was the one having a relationship with Michele, and of course Chris was saying just the opposite. So we knew something had happened. Something was up with these guys.
That's interesting, isn't it? So they could have both been intimate with her, and okay, were those interviews recorded? No,
we had tried to. I went down with a colleague of mine, another private investigator, who I had worked with the state police, but he had retired and got his PI license. So we teamed up, went down.
Yeah.
So he had turned on a recorder when we first went in Stacy's house, but he wasn't there when we first got there. His wife had let us in, and they were sitting there on the couch waiting for him to come back. He was out hunting, and but by the time he got there, the recorder had run out.
Darn.
So we kind of missed out on that.
That's such a shame.
Later, he was much later. One of Cal's new attorneys and his own investigator went down and re-interviewed Stacy again, and they did record it, and we have that recording, and it was pretty bizarre what he was telling them.
Wow. Okay. Man, that must be so annoying for you for that not to have been taken further, and for that the sort of discreditation of that whole part of the investigation as well on your part. because we've still, the family, for Michelle's family, they've still got a missing daughter that's potentially been murdered.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, and I tried to convince the state police that hey, if you pursue this, I think there's a good chance you're going to find out who really did this, and with the potential of bringing Michelle home. And so it was a little frustrating for me to sit back and watch as they did nothing.
Do you think Stacy and Chris, if they do you think that they found it difficult to talk in front of their wives? If their wives were there at the time when you was interviewing them, or there was something that they just couldn't be honest about of some sort of relationship they had with Michelle for some reason?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons they were lying, because when we talked to Chris, we talked to him alone, but when we talked to Stacy, his wife was right there, and she was listening very intently, because they'd only been recently married, and that was like his second wife, and in fact, when we were leaving, that day, Stacy had disappeared out the back door, and so I spoke to her briefly and said, has he ever talked to you about this? And she said, no, not really, but I'm going to be asking him a few questions. She said, and so I left her my card, and I said, if you hear anything, I said, give me a call. I'd be interested. And I never heard back, but I think she was a little concerned about what our line of questioning was.
Right, absolutely. And wouldn't it also be a massive shame as well if that actually they were innocent, right? And there's someone else here, but you have to pursue these lines of investigation, don't you? I mean, in something like this is not clear cut. I mean, it's just a very bizarre case, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's what I told Stacy. I said, if you didn't do this, convince me, tell me what happened, and clear your name. So I was trying to give him that opportunity, but he wasn't interested.
No, and when they start lying and, not wanting to tell the truth of what happened, even if they were, if it was some sort of, group sex thing that they were doing, right? Whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
Just to be honest, it clears their name, don't it? Do you know what I mean? I mean, who knows? I mean, I'm just saying that out there, but I mean, something was going on, and and as a sort of seasoned cop, you can tell. the stories don't add up, right?
Yeah, you learn to read people pretty good when you do as many interviews as I do. And the other interesting thing about Stacy was back when he was an early suspect of the state police in 2001. At some point, he was asked to take a polygraph, and according to the lead, he came in to take the polygraph, but there was never any record of it that we received, and so we didn't know what the results were, and we didn't know why he was asked to take it in the first place. So that always was a mystery. So. We felt that maybe something they weren't telling us everything about what they knew about Stacy.
Okay, now, right. Okay, so let's go back to the third. Well, actually, just before we go back to the third trial, with the car that sort of proved to you that, or with the whatever type of car it was, truck, sorry, that that Stacy was there, or someone like Stacy was there speaking to Michelle at the time. What did he have to say about the truck? That I mean, his truck was there. Well, we can't say it was 100% because there wasn't a number plate identification. But that type of truck, did he own that type of truck? Is that was 100% right?
Yeah, he did it. It was the motor vehicle records clearly showed that he owned a 2000 black Chevy pickup, and but he just denied that he was ever up on that road and with Michelle. He just said it never happened, claiming that he was at work. In fact, when I asked him, I said, why did you go into work at 4 or 5 a.m. when nobody was there? He says, his answer, he had a one-word answer: dedication. He said. I just kind of shook my head, and then I asked him about the polygraph. I said, and because he had told uh, someone else that interviewed him that he had been that he was only one of about 15 guys at the steel plant that had been polygraphed, which wasn't true. And then so when I asked him, I said, Stacy, why would they single you out for a polygraph? And he said, because somebody in town hated me. And I said, well, why would they hate you? He said, well, because I hired and fired a lot of people. But he was just a line worker. He wasn't in a position to do that. So, I knew he was just making that up.
Alarm bells, though. Most definitely alarm bells ringing there. Yeah, with that, just that type of personality, it just leaves a lot of, unanswered questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the third trial. So what happened then?
Well, because of the appellate decision, the venue was changed to the county of Schoharie, which is about 125 miles away from Owego. So we felt pretty good about that. At least it was going to be in an area where there wasn't a lot of publicity about the case. So we thought there'd be a better chance of getting a fair and impartial jury. So the third trial got started. They had jury selection. It took quite a while. And the trial was supposed to take about 8 weeks. It ended up taking almost 12. Moved along real slow, a lot of arguments, a lot of motions. But in the end, the jury got the case, and they deliberated for 11 days, coming back twice because they couldn't reach a verdict. And the judge sent him back, said, you got to try. But after they came back the third time, they said they were hopelessly deadlocked, and the judge declared a mistrial. So we had to start all over again.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is where it leads in then to the fourth trial, the final trial. And you were there at that trial as well?
Yeah, off and on, not for the whole thing, but I was there.
Yeah, and again, Carl's in prison for all this time. So I'm sorry. After the appellate division reversed his conviction, he was released back on bail. Right. Okay. So he's out. So he's finally out. So take us to the fourth trial, and just obviously, we just have to be brief on that. But just what happened at the fourth trial?
Yeah. Well, we did some more homework and put together a better defense, and so we were equipped with some pretty good information that we didn't have previously. So his attorney made a new motion to allow certain new information, and it was granted. But probably the most unique part of the fourth trial was Cal's decision to waive a jury and go with a bench trial, which is almost unheard of in a murder trial. A pretty risky decision. But as it turned out, it was the right decision because they presented the case. It went in well, and it was pretty apparent that the DA knew his case was in trouble. And as a result, the judge deliberated about 3 days and then made his decision and found Cal not guilty.
Right. Okay. And so is this still an active case then for the cops?
No. Well, they'll claim that because she's still missing, it's still active as a missing person. But I don't think they're doing anything further to try to find her or bring justice to those who are responsible. But the case against Cal was over. He could never be charged again with her murder. But he through his attorney, he did file a civil action against the police for a number of issues, including malicious prosecution and failing to investigate and tampering with evidence, that type of thing. And that matter is still pending.
Wow. Okay. So what about him as a person then? Is he obviously we've all got our issues, right? None of us are
Yeah.
perfect,
Yeah.
right? So I'm not painting
Yeah.
him as a perfect person without problems, right? Because we all do.
No.
What do you think? Is he still actively pursuing his ex-wife's missing case himself personally?
I don't think he's doing anything more. But at the time, he was using his own resources to, not only defend himself, but try to find his wife. And as a result, his attorneys and their investigators, including myself, made all those efforts to not only defend him, but to try to find Michele. That's why we made those trips to Texas, and we ended up digging up a burn pit looking for evidence on Stacy Stewart's former property. And so we were leaving pretty much no stone unturned that was within our authority as investigators, but we were somewhat limited without enforcement authority.
Well, yeah, and the money it takes as ongoing, to try to find someone. I mean, just even going to Texas, everything costs, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if that was my ex-wife, I don't know personally. Would I want to pursue? Would I want to just keep trying to find her? I maybe would do, and he's not. And I always found that with the cases like with the staircase killer, totally different scenario, but in some respects there's a few threads there that ring the same. What's your take on that? I mean, no one can put themselves in someone else's shoes, and I'm trying to do that right now. But if that was your ex-wife, would you want to, But then again, if you spent time away from your kids, you've lost so much, you've lost your business, you've lost everything for what happened. Would you just want to start again? I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a tough call to know what to do there. He obviously spent a great deal of his finances to do what he did, and I think he felt he had gone about as far as he could go. And if anything more needs to be done, it should be done by the authorities, and because he's really not in a position to take it any further. So I think he's kind of letting it go. I don't think he wants to, but I don't think he has much choice.
Right. And what do you think Stacey's family are doing? Are they doing anything?
I have no idea.
No.
As far as I know, he's still down in Texas, so I have no clue.
No, it must be bloody impossible. Again, like I say, to put yourself in their shoes, where they've got their daughter's gone forever, as far as the evidence shows, and you've got no closure there. That's the hardest thing.
You mean the Taylor family? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got to be real difficult for them. But I'm sure that they're still convinced that Cal did this, and so I'm sure that they're frustrated that he was acquitted and in knowing that their daughter may never come home.
Well, yeah, they would have been there at the trial. They would have given their statements as to why he should remain in and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes the family members, statements can be very powerful in a court trial, can't it? For what it's done for them, But then again, we've got to base it on the evidence and what this case is about. And
right.
Again, Carl stood to lose quite a bit of money in a settlement, with Michele. Had it gone through.
Yeah, well, he actually lost a lot more trying to defend himself.
Well, I get and the time away from his kids.
Yeah. That was the biggest part that troubled Cal. That he'd been yanked away from his kids like 3 different times, and missed a lot of their growing up. And fortunately, he had some strong family support behind him, and they took charge and made sure the kids were taken care of and educated and so forth, and they turned out well.
No, I can imagine they did, and they've got to live with their mum's disappearance. It was their murder case as well, or their 4 trials in a sense, for their childhood. When something like this happens, it ripples across so many people. People don't understand, do they? That one murder just has massive ripple effects.
Yeah, but they were very supportive of their dad, even though they were little at the time. By the time the 3rd and the 4th trial came along, they were there every day. Sitting right behind her dad, and real nice kids. Very supportive of their dad. And you talked a moment ago about his personality. Because there was a lot of people that had trouble with his personality, calling him arrogant and outspoken, and had anger issues and control issues, and he probably had a little of all of those. But after the first conviction, I can remember his attorney not arguing, but making a comment to the media, saying that because of the weak evidence, Cal was not convicted for anything he had done, but rather for who he was, because they portrayed that negative character of his, and the jury didn't like him.
Well, yeah. That's the way it's gone nowadays, isn't it? If you can't destroy the story, kill the character, right?
Yeah.
With a lot of things. And also, you mentioned before as well, not maybe in this interview, but the prosecution tried to salvage their case any way they could. Kind of what happened to you in some, kind of way as well. So I get how you feel. Not only this was your job, but obviously you could sympathize with what he was going through at the time as well.
Yeah.
Which probably made you the right person, to be quite honest with you. But yeah, I mean, we've still got a missing person, and that's sad.
It is.
Yeah. And
that's why I don't know if you noticed, but I actually dedicated the book to Michele, because I had told my wife all along. I said, I'm going to dedicate the book to you. But when I was writing that final chapter, I went back to my wife and said, "Look, I'm gonna do this for Michele this time," and she was really okay with that. So.
Yeah, I'm sure she understood why. I'm sure she did. I mean, that's a beautiful thing to do. That is, yeah. And obviously, you're still friends with Kyle up to this point.
Yeah, we talk once in a while. We're Facebook friends. I see him at the golf course once in a while. So, we have opposite personalities, but we had a good working rapport, and I think we have a mutual respect for each other.
Yes. Now Carl is in. I want to put this the right way, but there is there a case against Carl right now for something completely different? But I think it was stalking or something. And you tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, he did get arrested for stalking a trooper. But I don't know what's happened to that, because that was a long time ago, and it seems as like it's just kind of fell off the book someplace. I don't know what's happened to it.
And there was there was a story behind this. I mean, we're not really going into it much here, but
yeah.
This was to do with someone from the case, was it? Or
yeah, this was actually one of the lead investigators on his case for the second and third trial. Or the third and fourth trial, and Cal has his own version of what happened, and I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I think there's a possibility that it didn't happen the way the police said it did, and perhaps that's why it's kind of disappeared.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see, what he's going to get, where his case goes for the pending case he's got against the state, I suppose it is, or is it the county?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the state and the county.
The state and the county, yeah.
Including a couple of individuals, yeah.
Yeah, this reminds me of Avery a little bit, the making a murder, because he had the same kind of thing. I mean, it's totally different, right? I know that, but but he had the same thing going on at the time.
Sure.
Yeah, but just obviously a completely different story. But yeah, wow. This is, yeah. I mean, what's the most important message of the book, do you think, if there was one?
Important message. I think probably one of the important messages is that you shouldn't just blindly accept what the authorities are telling you. And it's okay to ask questions, and to challenge them when you need to.
Yeah, in the right way, absolutely. So I don't believe you've got a website yet. I think you're going to have a website for this book at some point.
I do have one.
Oh, you do? Sorry, your website is?
It's just davidmbeers.com.
Excellent. Okay, so if people want to get in contact with you, or if they want to, I think probably on that site, then you might have some extra information that wasn't in the book, maybe.
Yeah, well, actually, what I did, I put some photographs in there, and also some bonus chapters. Because when I first wrote the book, the manuscript was a little too big, so I had to cut out some chapters, but I saved them and I put them on the website.
Great. Yeah, I can imagine there was a lot you wanted to put in this because, it's been your life as well, and it's been a story that you've really wanted to tell. So, I really appreciate, David, you coming on as well, and I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you, and it's a really fascinating case. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on, and I hope you finish reading the book. I also have an email address. It's just davidmbeers.author@gmail.com. And that's at the end of the book, so readers can contact me that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you much. Good talking to you.